The modern world moves at a blistering pace, driven by automated assembly lines and precision robotics. But the man who engineered this, high-speed reality, actually began his life trapped in the slow, grueling rhythm of a 19th-century farm. In the late 1800s, transportation was largely limited to horses and trains. The few automobiles that did exist weren't practical machines for the public. They were expensive, highly unpredictable racing devices built strictly for the rich. Born in 1863 in rural Michigan, young Henry Ford was expected to take over his family's farm. The labor was intense and entirely reliant on the unpredictable forces of nature. After the sudden death of his mother, his only real anchor to the rural lifestyle, his hatred for agricultural work intensified. He needed a way out. He found his escape in mechanics. At age 12, his father gave him a pocket watch. Rather than simply tell the time, Henry figured out how to take it completely apart and put it back together in a matter of minutes. He studied the gears and springs, learning exactly how each tiny component governed the next. Soon, he was fixing watches for everyone in his neighborhood. By his teenage years, that curiosity scaled up to heavy machinery. He encountered portable steam engines used by local farmers and quickly mastered operating and servicing them, eventually traveling across southern Michigan to fix engines for the Westinghouse Company. On the farm, progress was dictated by the seasons and the physical limits of horses. A machine, however, followed the logic of its design. For Ford, these mechanisms offered a predictability and a sense of order that agricultural labor simply lacked. At 16, against his father's wishes, he packed up and left the village for Detroit. The city was rapidly industrializing, fueled by steam power and constantly looking for young engineers willing to work. Surviving in the city required extreme discipline. Ford took low-paying apprenticeships at machine shops during the day, earning just $2.60 a week. To cover his rent, he fell back on his childhood hobby, cleaning and repairing watches 6 hours a night. Around this time, Ford read a British magazine that described a new invention, the internal combustion gas engine. Unlike steam engines, which took 30 minutes to heat up and build pressure, a gas engine performed all of its combustion internally. It was smaller, faster, and vastly more efficient. There was just one problem. The gas engine required an electric spark to run, and Ford didn't fully understand electricity. To solve this, he applied for a night engineering job at the Edison Illuminating Company. He kept their steam engines running, and in his ample free time, he studied their electrical systems until he understood exactly how to wire a spark plug. All those distinct skills finally merged in 1896. Working out of a shed, Ford completed his first working experimental car. He called it the quadricycle. It was essentially two bicycles placed side by side, powered by his own gasoline engine. Building a functional car out of spare parts was a massive personal achievement, but scaling that invention to reach regular people meant he would need a factory, materials, and significant capital. He had to convince wealthy investors to back a vehicle designed for the working class. He convinced the mayor of Detroit to help launch the Detroit Automobile Company, but it collapsed after just 1 year. Ford's perfectionism slowed down production to a crawl, and his wealthy stakeholders were relentlessly pressuring him to abandon the working class model and build passenger cars for the elite. He secured backing for a second company, but the exact same conflict arose. His investors brought in another engineer, Henry Leyland, to take over and build luxury cars. Annoyed by the interference, Ford walked away. That company would eventually be renamed Cadillac. Stripped of his companies, Ford turned his full attention to the dirt track. Car racing was exploding in popularity across the United States. Ford realized that if he wanted the leverage to dictate his own business terms, he had to prove his engineering superiority publicly. He built monstrous, high-horsepower vehicles. In 1904, one of his designs shattered American speed records, maxing out at over 91 miles per hour. That victory generated a massive wave of publicity, proving to any potential backer that Ford was the premier automobile designer in the country. He now had all the leverage he needed to start a third venture, the Ford Motor Company. But the failures of his past taught him a strict rule. To build the accessible car he actually wanted, he resolved to never again put himself under the orders of outside investors. He hired a team of engineers who shared his vision and spent 5 years prototyping. The result was the Model T. He announced to his associates that this would be a motor car for the great multitude, built so efficiently that any person making a good salary could own one. The public response was overwhelming. Within days, 15,000 orders flooded in. The demand was there, but the capacity was not. At the time, cars were built one by one, with teams of mechanics crowding around a single stationary frame. The process was entirely too slow. The solution came from an unlikely place. During a trip to Chicago, Ford observed a local slaughterhouse. Workers stood still while animal carcasses were moved continuously past them on an overhead rail, with each person performing one highly specific task. He reversed the workflow of his own factory. He moved operations to a massive new plant in Highland Park, Michigan, and eventually implemented a moving assembly line. Instead of mechanics walking around a stationary car, the chassis was physically pulled down a track, bringing the work directly to stationary laborers. This chart highlights the system's efficiency. Build time dropped from 12 hours down to 90 minutes. Producing over 300,000 cars a year, he passed savings to the consumer. The Model T's price dropped from $850 to under $400. By doing this, Ford completely decoupled the automobile from the idea of wealth. He turned an elite luxury item into an affordable, everyday tool that allowed ordinary people to travel wherever they wanted. But this hyper-efficient system took a severe toll on the human beings operating it. Highly skilled craftsmen were insulted by the work, now relegated to turning the exact same bolt over and over for hours. The repetition was exhausting, and workers began quitting in droves to join competing firms. Faced with a crippling labor shortage, Ford made a move that stunned the industrial world. He voluntarily doubled his workers' wages to $5 a day. Competitors thought this would bankrupt him, but instead, mechanics from across the country flocked to Detroit for the pay raise. This 24-hour breakdown shows how he capitalized on the new wages. By reducing their daily schedule by an hour, Ford could divide a full day into 3 precise 8-hour shifts, turning his factory into a continuous operation. Ford engineered high wages and shorter workdays out of pure necessity. He created the modern middle-class employment standard specifically to keep the gears of his own massive industrial machine turning without interruption. By the early 1920s, half the cars driving anywhere on Earth were Fords. Tired of answering to anyone, Henry bought out his remaining investors completely. He was now the sole owner of the largest automobile company on Earth. But complete isolation breeds blind spots. Ford was convinced he had achieved mechanical perfection. He stubbornly believed the Model T was the only vehicle the public would ever need, and he refused to alter the design. Chevrolet and competitors began winning over the public with stylish bodywork and refined interiors. Drivers were now prioritizing comfort and aesthetic appeal alongside basic utility. Even his own executives saw the writing on the wall. Ford had appointed his son, Edsel, as president of the company, and Edsel desperately pushed his father to design a new car to meet consumer demand. Henry flatly refused to listen. The exact trait that helped him build his empire, his absolute refusal to compromise or share control, was now actively paralyzing his company. As sales stalely dropped through the late 1920s, the financial reality became impossible to ignore. Ford was finally forced to shut down the iconic Model T assembly line entirely to retool for a new vehicle. To maintain total dominance over the new production cycle, he built the gigantic River Rouge complex. It was the largest factory in the world, capable of processing every single raw material, from raw steel to rubber tires, needed to assemble a car in one continuous flow. Out of this massive facility came the Model A. It was a clear technical upgrade, featuring a fresh design and improved engineering, but the delay had cost the company its absolute grip on the market. By 1936, despite the massive infrastructure investment and the launch of the Model A, the Ford Motor Company slipped to third place in the United States, permanently overtaken by General Motors and the Chrysler Corporation. Ford clung to control through the Great Depression. It wasn't until 1945, 2 years after Edsel died of stomach cancer, that Henry finally surrendered the company to his grandson. He passed away shortly after, in 1947. Ford's pursuit of absolute control gave rise to the moving assembly line and the incredibly affordable passenger car. These systems established the blueprint for 20th century manufacturing, even as Ford's own inability to relinquish power left him trailing the very industry he had built.